So thank you all for coming, and thanks especially to the 5 McGill graduates who are very generously offered to come and speak to you today about what they've been doing with their lives since they finished McGill. I'm not going to say too much as an introduction. I just wanted to perhaps contextualize this roundtable a bit. It's a result of a series of discussions that I started organizing a couple of years ago at McGill that came out of, in fact, kind of international discussions about the place of the liberal arts and humanities in society today. As you're all aware, today, as so often in periods of economic difficulty, if not depression, people, sort of are very anxious, sort of thinking about jobs and careers, and therefore, in universities, there have been, across North America and in England as well, drops in enrollments in liberal arts and humanities subjects, and a belief that humanities and liberal arts are really luxury items that people cannot afford to study. And then, in fact, one of the things that we can question, too, is whether or not government should be subsidizing them. Some of you may be aware that Japan last spring, the Minister of Education issued basically a command across the country to all universities to get rid of their humanities and liberal arts programs, which fortunately some universities pushed back on, but it was a sign of the times in many ways, and something that has been certainly being talked about with other in other countries that are under financial difficulties, and especially countries that are governed by conservative governments who generally are not that interested in the humanities. And I mean, one of the assumptions behind this, of course, is the idea that the purpose of an education is to prepare people for the workforce. A assumption that in many ways seems very sensible, except when you think about subjects like English and philosophy, that these are, or history or others, these are areas of study that do not necessarily directly lead to an obvious career, aside from being a professor or a teacher, perhaps. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with these discussions was to get students and faculty talking about why, given that people are studying English today. And it was very illuminating, especially to hear from the students, and I hope to have in the future some more of these discussions about why people feel it's important to study English. And as you may, I think all of you are kind of aware of some of the reasons, the sort of personal satisfaction, the sort of feeling of growth, the way in which it does teach you critical thinking. But one of the also things that came out of the discussion is that the question about sort of where does it go afterwards, because part of the problem about the general discussions globally is that with the sort of a kind of worry about whether studying humanities is valuable, there has been under that a kind of assumption that people who study humanities do not get jobs. And while in the discussion that we had a couple of years ago, it was clear that for students thinking that I'm studying this because it's going to lead to this kind of career was not the way that they were thinking. There also was a little bit of anxiety about sort of, well, what was going to happen afterwards? This was all very well. And I thought that it was very important to in fact, start showing quite sort of specifically that the assumption that people who study humanities do not get jobs is absolutely false. One of the problems about proving this is there just hasn't been a lot of statistical data, because it's much easier to track what happens to engineering students and how many of them get placed in engineer positions. Keeping track of what happens to English graduates is a little bit like herding cats, so if everyone goes off in interesting directions, and the more interesting, the harder it is to find out what they've done. But I think sort of the more that we looked and talked about our graduates, we discovered that people were getting really interesting jobs and doing fascinating things. And I felt that that was something that was also really important for English students to see. and to hear about. To know that while you may choose English not because you are feeling that it is going to lead to a very specific career, it does open up all kinds of possibilities for you. The 5 people who are going to speak to us today are really kind of representative of just a couple of the things that you can do with an English degree. And what I hope that they will talk about is not only what they're doing, but depending on sort of how you feel about it, and sort of how you got there. Because I think, for many people coming out of English or other humanities studies, it can sometimes be a little bit of a trial and error procedure too, because it's not immediately self-evident what you're going to do. So what we're going to do is we'll just be going around the table. And I'll just introduce everyone sort of by name quickly, and then allow you to take off or take over. Dina Yanofsky here, Amol Hazelton, Anna Asmakopoulos, Emma Mackay, and Declan Rankin Jardin. So Dina, would you get the pleasure to open up the conversation? Yeah.
Sure. So I'm a librarian here at McGill. I don't know if anybody's ever seen me. No, we're kind of like unicorns. You might spot us. You're really, really hard. I came to McGill as a master's student. I did a BA in philosophy, and then I came to McGill and completed the MA and went on to do the PhD for a few years before I dropped out. For me, the English degree was always an end to becoming a professor or to studying in an academic environment. But at one point, I realized that the job market wasn't going to be as robust, or wasn't going to support my potential employment. I started to get quite nervous about it. And as in life, lots of other things happened, different factors. And so what happened to me was that I started talking to another colleague in the Humanities who was doing his PhD at the same time, and who told me a story about his sister who was an archivist. Anybody know any archivists? No? So, the nice thing about being an archivist is that you get to do research. And that you get to go home at night at 5 p.m. and come back and do more research. And there's jobs that, for me, what I would say the attractive part was that it was a 9-to-5 position, that it was a position that I could get in a corporate environment or in an academic environment. There were just plenty of opportunities there, but I still got to keep that love of doing research, and that academic, my academic disposition would still be fed, I suppose I could say. So that's what I did. I dropped out. I went to U of T to study to be an archivist. And then something happened. I didn't like being an archivist. I had actually an internship at the AGO, which is the Art Gallery of Ontario, which sounds really fascinating. And I was working in the basement by myself, which most archivists do, by the way, if anybody's thinking about being an archivist. You can't have a dust allergy, and you have to like working alone. And I kept reading through other people's lives, and I was more interested in doing things than actually reading about other people doing things. These were very rich people who were doing things, or artists, but the point for me was it wasn't fulfilling enough. So I was also at the time working part-time at a library at York University, just to have a part-time job as I was doing my studies. And what I started to notice was that the academic librarians had a pretty nice job. They had a pretty sweet setup. For those of you who don't know, academic librarians at the university level, are usually tenure track, which means that they're researchers as well as practitioners. And for me, that was a really nice way to start thinking about maybe working in a library. I'd always worked in libraries, I should say. So I had a disposition already. I started working in libraries when I was 12, shelving books. The one thing that I knew about libraries was that librarians are mean. I did not like libraries. I hated libraries and librarians, to be quite honest. But the opportunity at the academic level was very different, because there was so much going on in libraries at the time. And so maybe I should give some dates. I ended up graduating from U of T with an archive degree in 2006. And that's a really important time period. If you think back, even in terms of the technology that you use today, Google Maps only started in 2005, but it's become a ubiquitous part of our lives. And that's the type of technology that started to shape our information environment today. And so being in the library is actually a really exciting place to be. It's not about shelving books. It's not about organizing materials. I mean, sure, that's a bit of it, but that's not what I do as an academic librarian. Most of my time is actually spent around technology and building access points, thinking about access points to information. I'm actually a map librarian, which means that I work with a very interesting or unique material type. But think about maps as a technology themselves. What do we do when people need that type of information, topographic information or information that they want to use for even working with literature? I don't know if anybody here is taking some of the courses with Professor Cook and doing some literary mapping. The idea that technology is now infiltrating the way that we actually ingest information or critically work with information is quite important to libraries and librarians. The other part about being a librarian that's really attractive to me is that it really has a lot to do with information literacies. That's a huge part of being an academic librarian. It's not just working with the materials, but also working with you, students, and faculty and staff, and trying to not only give you access to information, but teach you how to access that information. What skills do you need to have to go out and to actually get information from the government or to use an archive, but also critical thinking skills. What type of information are you using? Is that information the best information? So that's my story, I guess.
Thanks, Dina. So we'll go around the table and then we'll have a discussion afterwards, because I think it's best to, sort of then we can address questions that may be to a couple of people. So, Molly?
Sure. My name is Wall Hazelton. I'm a producer with a Montreal company called Moment Factory. It's perhaps known best as a multimedia and entertainment company designing big rock shows, Madonna's Imagine Dragons, Muse, which just came through town, and doing some really innovative things in that industry. But the part of Moment Factory that I've led, it has come much more from the permanent projects and our ability to now communicate content and experiences into physical environments at any scale. I did my undergrad at McGill from 89 through to 94. I say 89 because I actually started and then decided to take a year off. Went to work in Nicaragua for a year and came back in 90 and really put my nose to the grindstone and met Maggie and a number of other people. Yeah, more or less put my nose to the grindstone. So started in architecture and immediately felt unfulfilled. My dream in life was to create exceptional experiences of space and place, and rapidly I was much more interested in going into the universe of the imagination through literature and all of the places and voyages and time periods and experiences that civilizations have known over the course of time leading up till now and even into the future. And so I transferred and did my bachelor in English literature and Spanish literature with a minor in architectural history, and thoroughly enjoyed that with a few hiccups along the road, and came back to McGill for a second degree 10 years after that in 2003 and did a Master's of Urban Planning. And a lot of people don't see any of those things fitting together very coherently. But in the intervening period between those two, I had taken my interest in architecture with my ability to distill, perceive, and recommunicate a vision and an understanding of places and people, and had become very influential in Edmonton, where I was living, as a builder in the construction industry, but also as a city builder among the city officials and whatnot in town, imagining a better city, a better place for our families, for our artists, for our creators, and became interested enough that in 2003, subsequently to having a huge piece of glass fall on my neck from a skyscraper, And when they stitched me back together, I decided that I didn't give them a second go at things, and I was free to do what I wanted. And I came back, did this degree in urban planning, was subsequently in 2005 hired by the city of Montreal and a local organization called the Quartier du Spectacle to lead this vision for creating an arts and culture district here in Montreal. And from 2005 to 2009, I led much of what you now see as a very illuminated, exciting environment around Place des Arts, all of the infrastructure that now hosts the festivals as we know them, and the Winter Fest, for those of you who stuck around for that time, with LED Ferris wheels and all kinds of things that bring hundreds of thousands of people out into their city to share and experience things together at times of year where only 10 years ago it was quite a desolate wind tunnel down St. Catherine Street. So the ability to imagine alternative experiences and communicate those in a convincing way, and then have enough additional tools and allies and champions to be able to make those visions happen, I would say is the key way that I've used my English skills. And I would exhort you, no matter what your passions are and interests may be, that to remember that without the written and spoken language that we have no means of sharing everything that we care about, everything that we know, everything that we imagine and conceive as human beings, individuals, and as civilizations and societies. And the passion that I had for the English language might be described as much more practical than academic or theoretical, in that I was always enthralled by people who, either through the way that they could speak or the way that they could write, mastered the ability to condense and communicate an idea, a vision, a thought. And it was that impulse to deepen my ability to understand and synthesize the world and master my own ability to communicate in a number of different situations or environments that led me to love English, to, I feel, master it. And now I've ended up at Moment Factory. Why? Because when I did my master's in urban planning, I did it with a specialization in place branding and competitive identity. That is the idea that you can take a destination, distill the most authentic and meaningful aspects of its people and its architectural language, and re-communicate that in your design gestures in a way that not only makes the local population feel honored and embark and engaged with with their own environment and their city, but also it stands proud on the international stage as an amazing destination to go and experience. And during that time, leading the Quartier du Spectacle, one of the companies that stood out in terms of helping the Quartier du Spectacle come to life was Moment Factory. When I left in 2009, left Quartier du Spectacle, I joined Moment Factory, and we were probably 35 employees at the time, and 99% of the company's work and revenues came from live entertainment. Now we're 160 people, desperate to hire 100 more people to make it 250, 300 people, and 80% of our revenues come from large architectural urban scale projects where this language and vision around destinations and how our destinations can be more meaningful, tell more stories, and reflect ourselves and embrace the world in different ways. It's created quite a juggernaut here in Montreal, which is contributing to the way the world is now integrating storytelling and media into their 3D universes. So that's a little bit of my trajectory. I look forward to talking and asking questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Amal. Anna?
My name is Anna Simakopoulos, and I am the CBC Montreal News assignment editor. And at a time where, because of successive cuts and because everything is happening in the digital sphere, we have merged TV, web, radio. It's all one. There's no such thing as a TV reporter anymore. You're a field reporter or you're a desk reporter. And everybody has to be able to do everything. Before this, was the arts reporter for years and years and years, and for television, it was the best job. How much I used to go. I remember when Moment Factory started. I remember going to the early Moment Factory offices last time I was there. And it's a great space to get out. You still have people on rollerblades or on skateboards, but
a dozen dogs.
just a really great space, and it was a job that allowed me to pick up the phone, talk to people. It's always been one of the things I loved about being a reporter. It's a privilege you have to call anybody up, talk to anybody, learn about things. So for anybody who has a thirst for knowledge and wanting to learn more and communicate that was a great career path. But I had a very unexpected trajectory into it. I actually didn't get a BA at McGill. I got a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry. And the best part of that was that I felt so out of I felt so just out of place in chemistry that I went to find like-minded people and joined the McGill Daily, which was where I caught the first part of the journalism bug. And remember chasing the Chancellor of McGill up the street asking questions of him before he jumped in the car and ran away, and he's no longer journalist anyway. And I thought, oh, this is great, and this is exciting. But even then, I didn't jump into journalism right away. I did an undergraduate degree in English at Concordia, and then my master's here, and my two favorite clubs are here. And it was something that I felt very torn. I was going to write my graduate record exams. I wanted to do a PhD on Victorian sensation novels. I was very interested in mysteries and loved Victorian fiction. But I also had been writing for community papers, for the Montreal Mirror, all the way through. And bumped into a Concordia prof saying, oh, I'm torn, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, why do you want to do a PhD? And I said, well, because I love reading and I love books. He said, oh, it's clear, just don't do it. Stick with journalism. You can read books anytime. And it ended up being really good advice because I did go into journalism and I had an entry-level, 6-week contract at the CBC as a researcher on the assignment desk, and my job consisted of listening to a police scanner, calling the police, and writing short announcer voiceover packages. It's where you run pictures and you write for the anchor. And I had no clue how to write for broadcast. And was advised that the best way to learn how to write for broadcast was to read Ernest Hemingway, that his pared-down writing style would be very useful for me. And it was my entry into it. And I remember when I first stepped into the TV newsroom, I remember thinking, wow, there's so much you can do here. I mean, there are so many different jobs. When you watch a TV newscast, you just see, it's just what you see on the screen, but there's this whole wealth of people behind there. And I thought, oh, I could spend 10 years here and never be bored. Well, it ended up being a lot longer than that, and I'm still not bored. And I've been very lucky that whenever I felt I was due for a change or was stagnating, there are always new opportunities. And with those new opportunities, the challenge like the one that I have now, I'm learning on the job. I'm paid to learn. I'm paid to figure out how we are covering news. And so every day I'm in at 6 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out what is out there, what are fresh stories, what is in the menu, what would work really well on what platform, and how are we going to do it, what are the logistics. When at a time when, and all of you know this, we're trying to figure out how will people consume our information. What is the best way? What is the best kind of video for web? What do people want? Is it text on video? And everybody's constantly experimenting with it. So it's a really interesting, exciting time to be there. So yeah, meandering. That was my career path. It's still meandering and still rewarding.
And what,
Meandering is a good word. I'm Emma Kai. I'm the editor-in-chief at Ask Men. It's a large men's lifestyle website. I never quite imagined I'd end up here. I guess I was thinking about this talk and just going back in my head, being just about to graduate, and the headspace I was in then. I thought at that point I had just done my honors project with Brian Children's a creative project based on Virgil's eclogues that translates really clearly into a career path, right? But it was a lot of fun. So yeah, at that point I was either going to be like a circus performer or working with inner city kids in Vancouver for a bit, or maybe a kayak guide. I didn't really have a 5-year plan or anything remotely like that. But it was clear to me that I needed to gain experience. I needed to find something that was meaningful to me as a person, that I would be motivated to continue to do, and I needed to make some money somewhere in there. So it came, I guess, probably it was about this time of year, and one of my professors, Robert Lecker, he had a publishing company, UCW Press, on the side, and he was looking for interns. And so I jumped at the opportunity to just get some experience in something. So I started working there, and that was probably, by the summertime, it had turned into a real job. I stayed there, I think, for about 3 or 4 years, and I was an acquisitions editor for much of the time, which was a really fun job to do because you basically get to pick which books get published. And then I took over the production manager job when the production manager went on mat leave. And so we learned all the ins and outs about book production, and that was really awesome. So I could really kind of be a control freak and see a book project through from start to finish. And I kept coming up with these crazy projects that nobody was really, well, my bosses there were not really, didn't quite understand necessarily. Books about graffiti and pit bulls and this graphic novel by a DJ, Kid Koala, that had no words but a CD soundtrack. It was a lot of fun, and it was really cool that they let me play with her publishing program like that. But at a certain point, I think it was 2004, they decided to part ways, the two partners, and they closed the Montreal office, and so we all got laid off. So first thing I did was send out an email to all my contacts. I was like, I need work, I can help you make a book. And I got an email back from my friends who had made this film, Fubar, about some Canadian hosers in Calgary. And they were looking to make a book based on their film. So I helped them self-publish this book. And meanwhile, got into this SAGE program. It's a soutien d'aide aux jeunes entrepreneurs. And if you're under 35, it's a great thing to access, especially if you're on unemployment. That may be a criteria. And so they helped me put together a business plan and basically secure financing to launch my own publishing business, McGill. And so I started this publishing company, McGill Media, and I published a number of books. There was, I have some here if anyone wants to look at them later, but a book about the Big O Pipe. So it's a skateboard spot that's like legendary in the skateboard community. 300-page color book. I lost a lot of money, and I have a lot of them sitting in my closet. But it was really fun. And yeah, a bunch of different books. And I did that for about 3 years, and it was really, really awesome to be my own boss, to just decide that I wanted to take my dog for a walk in the middle of the day, and I was going to work the late shift, and that was okay because I was a boss. It was a lot of fun. I'm not quite so good on the self-promotion side of things. So just kind of being a one-woman show was kind of exhausting. So at a certain point, James Basil, who had been actually, I kind of been overseeing his work back at UCW, he had gone on to start working at Ask Men, and he was the editor-in-chief then, and he invited me to come work at Ask Men as a managing editor. So I jumped at the opportunity to have a regular paycheck, and I went over there. And you know, it was a little bit odd. It was not exactly where I imagined myself as a feminist literary type ending up. But I was able to find meaning in that work, knowing that we were helping guys work through the issues that they were really too, might be ashamed to ask anybody outright, but you can Google it, and we were really good at search engine optimization, so we'd always come up right at the top. And that was really kind of the basis for the site's success. It's a 16-year-old website based in Montreal. And yeah, I mean, I think at our peak we're getting 21 million visitors a month. I mean, it's not, now there's a heck of a lot of competition, so it's tough. But like I was saying, like, it's really exciting to be on the web right now and to figure out kind of what connects with people, what do people want, because really what I've learned in the past 6 months is just look at the data, like see what the data is telling us about what people want to consume, what the users want to experience, and there's so many exciting ways to pull levers using SEO, search engine optimization, using social media. We've just stumbled upon this Facebook video format that has allowed us to have about, I think, 250 million video views on Facebook since the beginning of January. So it's exciting. There's no 2 days are the same. I have an amazing team. We joke and make puns all day, and it's actually pretty cool. And I still do books on the side. I'm working with people still on a number of projects and a few other clients. So it's kind of busy, but in the end, it's a lot of fun.
Thanks,
Hi, my name is Declan. So I majored in English Lit and Physics. I did like a double major at McGill. I've grown up in Montreal my whole life, and for me it was more about when I went into university. It's kind of a deal with my parents. I just needed to go to university and get a degree. It didn't really matter what. And so I wanted to kind of be challenged, and writing essays was something that was kind of that I'd never really done that well. So I was like, oh, let's do it. And physics was kind of a bit of an interest that I didn't really understand. So I did that. It took 3.5 years. It was great. And actually, when you mentioned Virgil, I realized that in your class when we were reading the George Dixon book 4, there's a whole section on bees. It's basically a book on bees.
I told the students.
And yeah, that whole book is kind of interesting because it goes through the seasons, and that was really probably one of the first deeper exposures I had to bees. And how I started the Advia, which is a bit of our urban beekeeping company, is with 2 other buddies. One of them has an uncle out in Manitoba, and we'd just be going there, kind of like tree planters, to make a bit of money during the summers. And we got so much exposure to bees. There were like 2,000 hives under 4 people, and it's hot, sunny, and you're suffering. But then, since we're city boys, we wanted to create something here, and so it became more about, I guess, instead of having 2,000 hives and 4 or 5 people tending to them, we wanted to have just a few hives, but have a lot more people involved in bees and understanding. And so we created a bit of a service around bees, of installing bees in people's backyards, on the rooftops, and then servicing the bees because we knew how to, and basically getting people to understand what's going on. And once you install a beehive, you start talking to everybody, and so there's a lot of work on that end of just starting up a project like that, and it's really fun, especially starting with 2 friends. We actually were in a jazz band together, and so we had all 3 of us would do these gigs, and we had a bit of the urge to go out and get contracts, because we wanted to play, so we'd always be giving out business cards, and we had that going for us. So then when we switched to a bit of an urban beekeeping company, searching for contracts was a bit more of a challenge too, and we would just kind of go to businesses, to schools, and just promote it like that. So it's cool to be a bit of a team, but I guess my English English degree is part of me, but it doesn't really, it's not clear to me exactly how, but it was definitely interesting. It was definitely interesting to, no, I learned so much. And I think that the one thing that, I'm like contradicting myself, the one thing that was fun, and coming back to Virgil's, Georgix, is that when you get into the actual stuff that you're reading, it can totally blow your mind, and you can find different ways of experiencing things, and just when it's written at different time periods, you can get away from kind of your the norms that are around you. So that was really fun, and it was one of the things that led me to be a bit more conceptual in the way I think, and especially when you consider, you know, we have 400 beehives in the city, and everyone right away is like, what are you doing? It's dangerous, and so that kind of thinking of just being able to rethink the way people experience bees and try to live in cities was nice, and I think I like that.
So, we thought now we just open the floor to questions. If people have things they want to ask any of the speakers specifically, or broad questions.
I have a very specific question for you. The bees, are they honeybees?
They are, yeah.
And how much honey do you get?
A typical hive in the city will make like 10 kilos. They make a lot of honey, but most of it's for them. So you don't take, you only take the honey that's kind of in excess.
Which works out to what, a small jar or?
10 kilos, so it's
Okay.
like 30 jars. And then it can be upwards of that, depending on the year and how strong the color is.
It's very good honey too. My cousin has one of their hives, and so I've had a jar, and it's very nice.
I found out one day that there was some on the roof where I work.
Yeah, so it's one of them.
Is that your
Yeah, it is. And we've been really lucky. We've been kind of working on word of mouth, but it's been growing. And now I've been back and forth in Toronto, taking training to set up. We're doing a hub there, and also doing one in Quebec City.
On the roof of the radio Canada building?
Yeah, not on the very top. We have another part that is sort of like a wing, and it was up on that part. In fact, one of our web people wants to have some. And
Some
wants
honey?
wants her own bees this summer. She wants to live block. Well, she wants to block. Make it
It's a big parking lot, they have to fly across to find flowers or something to follow the people.
I have a question for Anna. You said that you really started off by getting a contract at CBC. How did you get that? Because I think that's one of the most daunting things for people is sort of, like, how do you even go approaching them? How do you know how to do
word
that?
of mouth. I was actually working for the Ottawa Citizen.
How did you get that?
I did a 1 year, and it's actually a really good way to get into journalism. I did a 1-year graduate diploma program at Concordia, which is a really good, it's like a 3-semester course, and you do very practical internships. I was hired from there to be a summer intern at the Ottawa Citizen, and I kept on as a weekend reporter. So I had that, and I knew someone who went on maternity leave at the CBC, and they had hired somebody to be a researcher on the assignment desk, and it did not work out, and they were desperate. So she put my name forward, and I went in, and I was interviewed by the show producer and the assignment editor, and I remember at the end, they said, so do you have any story ideas? And thank goodness I had a whole bunch in my head of what I was pitching at the Ottawa Citizen. And because I would supplement my weekend work by pitching features to work for right from the different departments. And they liked my ideas and hired me on the spot. Like this was on a Thursday, I started on a Monday, and I didn't even have a television at that point. I didn't have a clue, so it was really quite something to go into working in a visual medium, but the journalism was the same, the research and the journalism was the same. And you still get hired the same way at the CBC, through an internship, or they're desperate for somebody and somebody puts their name forward. And it's usually to replace for 6 or 7 weeks. And then if that works out, you keep getting called back, and you keep getting called back, and before you know it, years have gone by, and then you might actually end up with a job. Like we have people who've been there for years, and they're there full-time, sometimes more than full-time. And there's a lot of work, not as many jobs, but there's still a lot of work. Those not started.
Just one other thing, sort of a global thing. I mean, it struck me that you're all in fields that in many ways these days are changing. I mean, your field is your work, doesn't exist, sort of 20 years ago. And Declan, you're doing something that's very traditional in a way, but you have to do it in a new way, in an urban, that's the whole thing about the urban needs. You both, Gina and Anna, you both talked about sort of having to change all the time, I mean, adjusting to new advances in technology and stuff, and of course that's the case for you too, with the editorial field has been revolutionized. And one of the things that's often said, sort of as when people want to say about what are the advantages of humanities or English education is sort of teaching a kind of flexibility and sort of a creativity that helps you deal with situations like that. That as opposed to in other fields where perhaps you're taught a specific skill and you apply that skill, but you're not able to, you're not sort of given ways to perhaps adapt if that skill is no longer needed. So what happens if you've been learned to do this, but you haven't learned how to find a new method if that no longer works. And do you think that that's true, that that it is something that, I mean, I think it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg. I think people who are attracted to English and humanities are people who probably think like that to begin with. But is it something that you feel that your degree did help you with? It, especially interested in you coming from starting off with science and then going off, and Declan too, you having both science and English.
Well, I think it's more that automatically once you're in the humanities or in literature, there aren't, unless you can become a prof or a teacher, there aren't that many clearly obvious jobs at the end of it. So you automatically, I think, have to be creative, be thinking outside of the box, and you end up with unbelievable, you realize once you're out and out of university how valuable communication skills are. Being able to understand what you're reading, complicated texts, and synthesize them, understand them yourself, and communicate them to other people, it's incredibly powerful, and a lot of the world doesn't have that. So I think that automatically I think it's are you drawn to it because you are maybe more creative and more able to think out of the box, and I think you're also forced to because there are no clear career paths. I could have gone into chemistry, but being in a lab, I couldn't even handle 3 hours in a lab. I'd run off to the McGill daily offices just because I needed to get out. I was not cut out for that. I never would have been able to do that. They put me in an edit suite, and I happily edit hours of television. It's a different kind of thing. But I just think you automatically have to be thinking creatively.
Yeah.
I have some questions about the library work. What are the sort of levels of qualifications that you need to get to different jobs?
It's a very good question. Librarians are very much segmented into different types of professions from very early on, as soon as you start at degree. Which isn't necessarily going to be the case in a few years, but right now, if you want to be a public librarian, well, first I should say that you need a master's degree to be a librarian. That's a Master's of Information Studies in some cases, or a Master's of Information. When you're in the program, you usually go streamlined into different areas: public librarianship, special librarianship, and academic librarianship. And from that point, it depends on your overall goals. So most public librarians have just a BA and a master's. If you want a job as an academic librarian, although it varies from institution to institution, but usually you'll find most of my colleagues, or many of my colleagues, have a second master's. So I have a master's in English literature, or will have a PhD in a particular area. For special libraries, it often depends as well. And for special libraries, it's often very specific, which comes back to what Maggie was saying, in terms of flexibility. Having an English literature degree, I'm now a map librarian, of all things, which is mostly being a data librarian in many ways, which means I have to deal with numbers which are very scary. But because I have that flexibility and the ability to, or at least I give myself credit for having the flexibility, I guess, To be able to take the critical thinking skills that I think that I was able to acquire through an English literature degree, it was very helpful to be able to be more flexible in the job market, which gave me more ability to apply for different types of jobs. And that's not always true. Whereas if you know very early on you want to be a children's literature librarian, you have a much narrower path to take. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I have another one. You said you do research.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Yeah. What do you do research?
So, as academic librarians, it could be a number of different things. It depends on your subject specialization. So, many librarians will do research in their particular areas. I can think of a colleague of mine at York University, who's an English literature librarian, works with lesbian pulp fiction, and her research focuses very much on the publishing industry. So it can be very, very, involved in a particular area. I have other colleagues who work more in terms of the technologies that libraries and librarians are using. So they do a lot of research on mobile technology. Information literacy, I mentioned, was important. So some of my work has been about open data, open access, and open information, and working with government to try and talk about what it means to build an informed and engaged citizenry. So I'm very much interested in what it means to live in an open democratic society and what it means to be an engaged citizen. So it can be very, very varied. Very, very varied, yeah. Thanks.
I'd like to add just a little word to that for the next question, is to say that you mentioned archivist and basement. We've recruited over the past 4 years 2 Masters of Information Studies who've become central to the Moment Factory team. As you can imagine, we're well known for this incredible visual content and very complex architectural spaces that we've designed. Every single thing that is involved in those projects is a file of some kind. And losing control or gaining control of our filing system and everything to do with understanding that content, being able to typologize it, if I apologize for my words, but these 2 people are literally at the epicenter of a team of 160 people. Every project that's initiated, they understand it at the very first day and map out a way of managing all of that information and creativity right from the day 1 through to the end of the project. And so it's they have a lot of fun, and we depend on them a lot.
We depend on one of your former employees.
How did we lose them? We want them back.
One of our digitization initiative librarians is Sarah Severson.
Oh yeah,
And then she
absolutely.
came to CBC.
We miss her. We must say hi.
Yeah. One of the things you learn from these